Welcome viewers, I'm Seth Mulli and this is The Wellness Effect. In this week's episode, we're focusing on stress. Bridget Edwards is a South African entrepreneur, author and EFT tapping specialist. She's here to help us understand stress better. Hi Bridget.
Hi Seth, thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. We've been discussing stress and I think post-pandemic, stress has become this hot topic in the workplace. But what is stress?
Well, firstly, let's get the elephant out of the room.
Yeah.
Stress is not an illness or a disease that so many people tend to think it is, even though it has consequences which can affect both body and mind. And the medical fraternity also say that at least 90 to 95% of all illness and disease is stress related.
Sure.
Okay. But stress is actually a response to something that causes us distress and makes us feel overwhelmed. And that is mostly external factors, like in our day-to-day environment, for instance. But it can also be what we're telling ourselves internally.
Wow.
Like the story we tell ourselves constantly, like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, and we put ourselves down in that way. So it can be internal as well as external, and that's what causes the distress and the overwhelm.
I like how you reference both internal and external factors. So is it a combination of both that causes stress, or is it all of them working together at the same time? Which one is the one that kind of takes us, into a horrible place?
Well, here's something else that's interesting about stress, is it's completely unique to the individual. And we tend to think that stress is like this global thing. And so there's a cookie cutter system and a one size fits all, but it's actually not. And this is what makes stress so difficult to discern, even for the medical environment and traditional psychotherapy, is because there can be so many factors that are stress related. It's not just one specific thing.
Sure.
But sure, we can have a particular event that we can say, okay, it was that event that caused me stress.
Correct.
Or I'm going through relationship issues, or I'm going through financial issues, which is a protracted period of time. So one can associate and say that that is what the stress is. But for most people, it can be anything and everything, internal or external.
Sure. And is there good stress and bad stress? We've kind of heard this floating around the internet, that there's some good stresses and then there's bad stresses. Could you define the two?
Absolutely. And that is such a good question. And I really appreciate the fact that you bring it up, because a lot of people don't understand the difference. So when I wrote my book, I actually dived into the good aspects of stress. And even I was surprised that there were so many. But let's get to the basics of what the stress response actually is.
Sure.
And that is, believe it or not, to keep us alive. It's to actually keep us in a survival state.
Correct.
And especially where there are life-threatening situations. So that is the primal reason why stress is so hardwired into who we are. It is part of our autonomic system, the nervous system. So you've got the parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest, and then you've got your sympathetic, which is the stress response, the typical fight, flight, freeze response. So most people have an understanding of what that is. And that is why I say stress is really good for us, because it's keeping us alive, essentially.
That's good.
But then when I wrote my book, I actually went into a couple of other aspects about what is the good quality of stress. And even though the consequences can be negative and prolonged and cause and lead to burnout, if you really look at stress and you're willing to actually go into some self-reflection, you can see the value of stress. So I'll just give you a few ideas around what I quantify that in my book. So especially something like an early warning signal for reflection and reevaluation of yourself and your lifestyle. Stress can also be a motivator and an inspiration to do things that you wouldn't want to do, and to drive you through that exam, to go and study and do what you need to do. So a little bit of stress is good for us. Another way is that stress can be a catalyst for change. So you can look at your life, reevaluate your life, and look at it and go, actually, I don't want that amount of stress on me. So if I now reevaluate where I am, I can make some changes. Two last things I'll say about that is that stress also is character building. It teaches you about yourself, and you can now start making some self-development changes. And as a result of that, it builds your character. And that's really, really important. And the last thing I also wrote about in my book is that stress is actually a teacher and a guide. It's not there to undo you. And even though we get into situations where we say and do things that we regret afterwards because of the stress response, it's actually there to help you. And if you can reframe that negative aspect that you have about stress and look at it from a positive perspective, you can make significant changes in your life.
Amazing. So you've mentioned the good elements of stress, that it can be a catalyst for growth, it can be a guide, it can inspire you to do things that you wouldn't do. What are the bad things about stress?
Okay. So the bad elements around stress is when we don't know how to manage our lifestyles, okay, and we don't know how to manage our own personal environment. So as a result there, what happens is we start responding to stress in a negative way repeatedly. And where stress really gets bad is when it's over a long protracted period of time and there's no interruption and you just don't get out of that space, particularly if you're in an environment that's causing you that. So what I mean by that is, for instance, you could be in a relationship at home, or you could be working in a company that the stress is just building and you can't get out of that. So that stress over a period of time is going to have a negative effect on your body and your mind and in general. And you can see it in people's demeanor as well. You can actually see when someone's carrying the world on their shoulders. And then when it really gets bad is when you've got chronic stress. Now, chronic stress can be related to just having had a trauma in your life. You've had a bad accident or someone in your life has died. And that stress is now chronic and it builds up and, you know, over time, especially if you don't deal with it and you don't get some attention that is needed to unpack it and to work through it. And then the worst aspect of stress is when you have either the chronic stress or the prolonged stress, you get to a point of burnout. That's really bad.
I like how you kind of gave it into stages of as chronic stress with trauma, and then it leads to burnout. And I think you mentioned something quite interesting, that stress is really about management. How do you manage stress such that you don't get to the point of burnout, especially in the workplace where as leaders, you're trying to drive productivity, you're trying to lead healthy teams. As an employee, you also want to contribute towards the success of the business. So you might work late hours and maybe you don't maintain a good lifestyle or healthy habits. How do you maintain stress so that you can kind of manage it in a good way?
Seth, that's a good question. And again, it comes down to the individual. But being self-aware is really critical in that particular situation. Because your stress response will be different from mine. And I'm just going to use an example, public speaking. Okay. It's one of the number one stresses. It's right up there in the top 5 stresses. Okay. Now, some people thrive in that space. They absolutely love it. They love being in front of an audience. And there are other people, just the mere thought of having to go and read something, and I know this from being dyslexic at school for myself, but just having to stand up in front of a few people and talk about something, that is so fearful for them. So it's about being really self-aware and then looking at yourself and going, okay, what can I do that can mitigate those circumstances, minimize those circumstances? What can I do that I can look after myself in such a way that when I do have this stress, it's going to have a lesser impact on me? Okay.
I like that.
And also about learning techniques and tools, which is one of the things I do with my clients in a therapy setting, is I give them tools that they can use day to day to manage their stress. Because it's possible to manage it.
Absolutely.
You know, it really is. But for a lot of people, the other thing I do notice is how many people that you know are always telling you, oh, I'm stressed, I'm stressed, I'm stressed. So what are you telling yourself?
That
I'm
you're
stressed.
And what will happen?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Yeah,
right?
that's good.
So if we can also change our languaging, and that's why I mentioned early on about the stress response to internal and external
I
factors.
see.
So what are you saying to yourself? So if you're going into a business meeting, nobody likes me, nobody listens to me, the team aren't going to be on my side, that is working on you internally. So
Yeah.
when you get into the meeting or the boardroom or wherever it is, can you see you've already created a negative stress environment for yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. We
So,
often believe the stories that we tell ourselves.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's a very good point.
yes.
And how would you describe the telltale signs of stress? So you talked about self-awareness in understanding yourself, maybe the things that you've gone through, the work stresses, and kind of figuring out, okay, here are the environments where I get stressful, here are things I can do to alleviate my stress. But how do you know, that I'm on the verge of burnout?
Well, again, that is dependent on the individual. And I think there are a lot of unhealthy telltale signs. And this is where a person needs to become honest with themselves. So and this is, please, when I share this is not coming from a place of judgment or criticism.
Yes.
I'm actually trying to help people to understand.
Sure.
When you are reliant on unhealthy coping mechanisms
Yes.
in order to cope with life, and by that I mean alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, binge eating. For some people, it's even extreme to the point of binging on porn online or going to gambling.
Yeah.
Those kind of unhealthy telltale signs
Yes.
are where you, as an individual, need to be honest. Or
Yeah.
if you have a family member that you know is in that space, that you could gently, and this is the thing, I say gently with someone who's stressed, because they're not going to take the criticism kindly.
Yes.
So you want to approach them gently. But for a lot of people who are in very high paying jobs where their stress is extremely high,
Correct.
and they are pushing themselves so hard because of that constant
Drive.
deadlines and things they've got to meet, very often they are in that category of unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
And it's a case of, again, self-awareness and being able to reflect and say, you know what, I'm actually pushing myself too hard, too fast.
Yeah.
And this is not helping me.
Absolutely.
And then another important aspect around that is to be able to recognize within yourself that you are pushing yourself too hard and you haven't taken time out. Because we're not robots.
No, we're not. We're human beings, not human doings.
Exactly. And we need to take the foot off the pedal sometime and actually give ourselves some break. But what I find for people who are really driven, very often it's because they're actually running away from something. And I know this on a personal level, and I know what that feels like and how difficult it is to actually face up to yourself and be honest with yourself and say, I'm in denial and I need to address whatever trauma it was that was causing the stress. And not everybody is in that space, understandably.
Yeah.
But I've just noticed this common thread in the years that I've been doing therapy. And for some people, it is that they have just pushed themselves too hard and too fast. And there's no underlying trauma, but there is genuinely the fact that they've just been overworking. In which case, you need to set in some personal boundaries.
Absolutely.
And maybe sit with your team and just say, I need some time out,
Yeah.
Take a bit of time out and go have a holiday. Just be at home, do what you need to do. There's so many ways of being able to manage stress too.
Absolutely.
But it really comes down to self-awareness and self-reflection. I think is the very, very important keys.
You mentioned something interesting, and I know for myself, when I'm stressed, how I can tell is through my body, because I start getting eczema, my eye starts to twitch. So how important is our body as an indicator that tells us we've got stress?
Absolutely important. And just feeling that tension in the body is one of the things. And again, because everyone is unique and different, if I may, I'll just share a couple of telltale signs that I wrote about that could actually help people. So there's 4 key areas. You talk about the physical side. It can be related to dizziness and nausea, stomach cramps, stomach aches, back pains, Funny aches and pains we often think it's related to something else. We've hurt ourselves, but actually it can be stress. But I'll just give you a couple of others: dizziness, headaches, nausea, insomnia, indigestion. Aches and pains is one that is a very common thing, and people often relate it to something else that they did.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, invariably you can track it down to a specific event that was very stressful, and that's when the aches and pains started. Other common ones are frequent colds, because what happens with stress is your immune system is suppressed.
Yes.
So you are likely to start getting different illnesses and diseases if you've got a compromised immune system.
Yeah.
Trembling,
Sure.
and being tired, fatigued, exhausted. That's on the physical side. But there are other common symptoms too, which are on the cognitive side. So in terms of your brain functioning, difficulty in making decisions, procrastinating, forgetfulness, inability to concentrate. Those are just a few of them there. Constant worrying, anxious and racing thoughts. That's on the cognitive side. Behaviorally, you've got things like bossiness, because now you've got lots of adrenaline in your system, so you tend to be a little bossy. Compulsive eating, or eating a lot less. Critical attitude towards others. Explosive actions, frequent job changes. Again, procrastination. Again, in terms of behavior, you could be sleeping too little or too much.
Yeah.
And then on the emotional side, anger is right up there on the list, because anger is very much related to the fight response.
Yes.
Okay. Irritability, anxiety, nervousness, crying, sadness, depression, negative thinking is very definitely in there. But I've got a whole list around here that, I don't want to go through all of them.
Sure.
But again, it's related to the individual and where they're at. But if you start understanding what the signs and the symptoms are, which is why I said one of the good aspects of stress is those early warning symptoms.
Yeah.
And early warning signs. And now you can maybe have a look at something like this and go through this and look at yourself and go,
That's
okay,
good.
that's where I'm at. That's what's going on.
Yeah, just like in a car, you've got that dashboard
exactly.
that warns you when you're low on fuel or the water level is low. It's good to figure out as an individual what those signs would be for you.
Seth, that's a wonderful analogy. And if I may just share,
Sure.
there is an American psychologist who actually looks at stress and uses the analogy of driving.
Nice.
So if you've got your foot on the accelerator all the time, that's the fight response.
Yeah.
Okay, you're angry, aggressive, irritable, you're in that like fight mode, and you just go through that. The other is having your foot on the brake. That's the flight response. So you become withdrawn, you pull away, you don't want to deal with people, you need time out. And the most difficult one for a lot of people is when they have the foot on the brake and on the accelerator, and that's the freeze response.
Sure.
Where they are literally like a deer in headlights, and they're stuck.
Yeah.
And they feel paralyzed in stressful situations. And you can actually see it in a lot of people. But for them, the agitation underneath there is so unbelievably painful for them. And even though they look like they're frozen in time, there's a lot happening internally.
Sure.
So I like that you brought that up, because it reminded me of that.
Thanks for sharing. You talk about EFT tapping, so it's not like EFT, like transferring funds. Maybe explain to us what EFT is.
I love that. A lot of people ask. So EFT tapping is actually an acronym for Emotional Freedom Techniques.
Amazing.
Okay. And EFT tapping is based on the Eastern philosophies around, most people know what acupuncture is today.
Yeah.
So if you're familiar with acupuncture, EFT is tapping on meridians. So you're physically tapping on actual points on the body, like around the face and the upper torso. And you're tapping on the meridians, which are related to where they would put the needles in for acupuncture.
I see. Okay.
Or if someone's gone for acupressure, you know that the masseur will press at certain points, and it can be very painful. And then there's this release of energy. So when I am working with somebody, we're working with an issue, we will use traditional talk therapy. So we're talking about the issue, and then we're connecting with what's going on in the body. Where's the emotion sitting in the body?
Yeah.
Because if you're feeling sad, you invariably will feel it in your heart.
Correct.
If you're feeling anxious, you'll feel it in your tummy. So we work with the physical body whilst we are tapping, and then there's an element of talk therapy. And it's very powerful. I've done it since 2007, and it is
Amazing.
life-changing.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Post-COVID, have you seen an increase in more patients coming through your practice that are more stressed? Or has there been a decrease in stress because of this work-life balance and work-life integration?
So there has definitely been an increase in stress. And the sad thing for a lot of people is many people lost their jobs or went through financial upheaval. So they haven't been able to get the therapy that they need because they can't afford it. And that I found increasingly sad is what's happened to people financially as a result of the whole COVID thing.
Yeah.
But yes, stress has definitely increased. And you can see it today, that even though a lot of people are working from home, which is so much more valuable and calmer for a lot of people, the underlying element is stress. And what I've also noticed, not only with stress, but also anxiety. People have developed a lot more anxiety than they ever had. And then the sad part of it too is depression. Because all of these emotions, anxiety, depression, stress, anger, they all go together. And all of that is speaking to people feeling threatened, feeling unsafe, insecure, because we were being told 24/7 what was going on in the world.
Yes.
And now after the pandemic, straight after that, there's all the wars that are happening. So people are constantly living under this threat and feeling unsafe and insecure. And as a result, that drives stress. It drives depression, you know, and it's not their fault.
Sure.
It's really not their fault.
And what can employers do to make environments that are safe and almost help manage stress in work environments? Because I know, sorry to interrupt, because I know it's based on the individual. The individual might have trauma, but what's the role of employers in helping the employees with stress?
Seth, that is a wonderful question. And I so wish more employers took this seriously. Because if they knew and realized the impact that stress alone has on their staff's productivity, as well as the high absenteeism levels, they would take this much more seriously. And in that case, I would recommend that they actually have more personal interactions with the staff on a regular basis, whether it's an HR department or get someone like myself in to come and interact with them, find out what is actually going on, what is happening. Because you can't differentiate your stress from your lifestyle and where you are. It's not like you could take it out of your head and put it on a box and say, okay, I'm leaving this at home because my stress is at home, and vice versa. Exactly. And you can't do the same when you leave your work and leave your work at your stress at work and then not take it out on your family. So it's a case of actually understanding, and therein lies the communication. If you can have honest, open communication and understanding and get to the bottom line of it, and maybe, as I say, get someone like myself in, I can help, we can resolve that, I can teach you what to do, and then you can manage that so much better. And I've worked with a lot of EXCO members, I've worked with high-level management as well as employees, and the difference they say that when they can show up at work being themselves without that stress, it makes such a difference. Their creativity increases, their productivity increases, their general well-being increases, their interactions with people in the office completely shifts and changes. You know, I've had situations with clients where they have told me they've got such a bad relationship with a particular member of staff that they don't even want to see the person in the building because they have such a visceral response that it's so uncomfortable for them. We've worked through it, neutralized it to the point that they can actually meet that person, speak to that person, and afterwards go, oh my goodness, I just engaged with that person I've been so terrified with, or I've had such an issue with over the last 6 months. And it was so easy. What just changed? It's because we neutralized what it was going on internally. That's what we neutralized. And so I would love to see more of this kind of conversation happening in workplaces. And if anyone is watching this and you know your colleagues going through stress, reach out to them.
That's good.
Touch base with them. Ask them
Yeah.
what's happening. You don't have to go into all the details, but
Mm.
just that human contact. And if anything, that is what the pandemic destroyed,
Mm.
is that it took away that human connection, which is
Yeah.
what we so desperately need as human
Absolutely.
beings.
Yeah.
And it's that empathetic connection and touch that makes all the difference. It's
Mm.
one of the tips of stress management that is
Mm.
critical.
Thank you.
So,
This has been such an engaging conversation. You've given us such good information that we can glean on, we can take through and action. But could you give us maybe one piece of advice for someone who's dealing with stress? Maybe they don't have the financial means to go to a therapist. What is one thing that you can do on a daily basis to manage your stress?
one thing is look at your lifestyle
Mm,
and make changes within your lifestyle.
that's good.
And that encompasses a lot of things, which we
Yes.
can unpack. If somebody's not sure what that means, they can contact me. But really, you can go through your lifestyle and look at it, and you will find the things that you can change. We
Mm.
all know what they are. We
Yeah,
just don't want to
absolutely.
change.
Yeah, we don't want to confront them. Yeah.
Exactly.
Excellent. So
Uh-huh.
thank you so much. It's been an absolute incredible conversation. I think we've learned a lot. And if you'd like to find out more, you can also go and check out this helpful resource, book written by Bridget Edwards. And in the next episode of The Wellness Effect, we'll look at ways to treat stress. Remember to subscribe. See you next time.
BankMed, the medical scheme of choice for the financial services industry. The Wellness Effect is proudly brought to you by BankMed, yours in good health.